Well, hello there, and welcome to day 63 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Today, covering the 2020 documentary, I Am Greta. This was a very sobering watch. It's interesting having talked about A Call to Spy yesterday, and the idea of being presented obscure historical figures in a very plain way, and the issues of historical representation against, engaging narrative. Because I almost feel like this is the perfect flip of that. This is a... Greta Thunberg isn't someone who is unknown. She's quite front and centre right now in the political and social landscape. Although that in itself is frustrating, and I'll get into that further shortly. But this, though a documentary is still narrative. Even a factual film has to be constructed, and this was put together in such a engaging and powerful way that really emphasized the human drama contained within the political and environmental struggle of this young woman. So, directed by Nathan Grossman, the documentary has been following Greta Thunberg since 2016, when she originally started her strikes against, in protest of the government's inaction of climate change, that is, the Swedish government. And the film charts her journey over a 2-3 year period, and her struggle to emphasize the lack of movement being done both by individual people, but more importantly by governments, about climate change and the declining environment. And as I say, it is a sobering watch for a number of different reasons. But primarily, this was very much a preaching to the choir film. I absolutely advocate for changes to how we address climate change, and that climate change is our greatest prominent issue that will affect generations to come. But even I was shaken by watching the journey of this woman who, frankly, she puts us all to shame. If even the most vocal activists for climate change that I know don't scratch the surface of the effort and struggle and sacrifice that she has been willing to go through to make her point across. Now, as I say, putting this alongside A Call to Spy, and again, this is completely coincidental. The intertextuality purely came from, as I was watching it, drawing comparisons to the fact that this is a documentary that tells a story about a character whose real life is being portrayed in a sense that the documentary wasn't, like many documentaries, the documentarian wouldn't have known the direction the film would have went in until the end of the documentary. So, the fact that this was, I suppose, maybe a local interest piece. This 15-year-old girl protesting, and the fact that it escalates until she's in front of the UN and going to the New York summit. There was no way to know that, and yet within that is this powerful story that really I connected to, and I felt really emotionally touched by. And as I said yesterday, the problem with The Call to Spy is that it engaged me intellectually, but I had no emotional stake in it, and I left feeling very little. Whereas this did both. I was intellectually... I don't... before this, I was aware of the character of Greta Thunberg, and that she had something to do with environmentalism, and that she was a teenager. But what I didn't... There were so many layers of this that I just wasn't aware of, or hadn't gone into any depth on. And as I'm learning about her, I'm also feeling the weight that she is being buried under. Because the structure of this is very much like the structure of a music biopic, where you see someone who starts in relative obscurity, who struggles to get people's attention, and yet, partly by determination and partly by happenstance, I suppose, or good fortune, she does get the right people's attention, and she pushes that, and then it escalates. But then comes the problem of being in the public sphere. Now, one of the things I wasn't aware of is that Greta Thunberg is on the autism spectrum. And that's very, that adds another level of interest to her character. The fact that not only is she, a 15-year-old at the beginning who though takes an interest, has a great knowledge of environmentalism, but also has this cognitive, social, alternative disorder. I'm sorry if I've misspoken on that, but as in, autism isn't, and the documentary explores this a lot. A lot of her critics and people who feel the need to commentate on her attack her primarily on the fact that what they refer to as a mental illness. Now, autism and the Asperger's and the autism spectrum are not a mental illness. I have friends who work in mental health, and I'm aware that that's a miscategorization. That to be an illness, by definition, means it can be treated, whereas this is someone whose mind has just developed differently to ours, and the difficulty is in her being able to function with this alternative cognitive ability. And despite the fact that she is high functioning, remarkably high functioning, you see that struggle. I talked in the last documentary I watched, A Glitch in the Matrix, about the fact that there was this dichotomy about, well, is it people who are outsiders to society drawn to this idea, or is it the fact that they're outsiders means that they don't really understand what... They get these ideas that are very much outside of the norm. And you could see the parallel. The fact that Greta, it's outlined that she socially grew up quite isolated, and though she has a good family network, and we see her really strong relationship with her family, the fact that she's isolated from her peers, and again her autism means that she processes information differently, and she's attached throughout her childhood into her teens and then on to the conversation about the environment and the political discussion. And that in itself is fascinating. And there's a big problem in fictional narratives about the portrayal of people who are Asperger's or on the autism spectrum, about the fact that they are either portrayed as non-functioning or hyper-functioning. And so you end up with things like Rain Man or that recent Sia film that got heavily criticised. But what's remarkable about it, and that what cannot be denied, is she is high functioning, and she is extraordinary because of it. And we shouldn't take autism as something that should be lifted above. It's not, as the Shane Black The Predator film has tried to infer, that this is the next evolution of the human race. That's a very dangerous and unhealthy way to think about it. But the fact that because of how she processes information, that she's passionately and vehemently fought for this is remarkable. But as I say, it then demonstrates almost the music biopic problem, the instant fame problem, where she is buried under the weight of being in the public sphere. And again, with her alternative ability, she struggles socially. She struggles with the fact that she's constantly being paraded in front of people and having to be forced into social situations, and you see the weight and pressure that it puts on her as a person. And there's something truly authentic about that, and really adds a level of depth and nuance that even for a documentary is quite remarkable. And again, it becomes that issue where the politicization or politicalisation of the environment, and I am definitely the advocate, the person for the fact that the environment should not be a political idea. The fact that one side is for it and one side is against it is ridiculous. It's something that affects us all, and yes, maybe the different ways of approaching it might be different, but the idea that somehow you're liberal by wanting to look at climate change and conservative or by ignoring it is I don't understand that. And it's the fact that political parties define themselves by their attitudes to climate change, or have done in the past, is again frustrating at least. And so the idea that she's having to meet, and she outright says time and time again, she constantly is meeting political figures, high profile people who are talking about climate change, but are doing little or nothing about it in any demonstrable way, that it's all politicians saying they will do things but not really doing them. And then the second issue, which is she doesn't want to be a celebrity, she doesn't want to be a figurehead. The documentary outlines that she doesn't want to be this, she doesn't want to be the person who started the climate change conversation, which is, she outright says, this is not the narrative that I wanted. I want to just simply put the environment first. But inevitably, because of the way we work as people, we attach to her, and people start to in en masse draw towards her in a way that clearly makes her uncomfortable and blurs the issue of the environment. And so she has to take quite extreme measures to continually draw people's attention back to the fact that it's about climate change. And that is genuinely fascinating and quite harrowing. And this is a very powerful documentary. And again, as someone who does agree that climate change is a problem, it is still shaming that this 15-year-old Swedish girl who's on the autism spectrum does more for the environment, or did more for the environment in the last 3 or 4 years than most of us, if any of us, do, our entire lives. And it really makes you step back and think about your attitude towards it. And I think if that was the aim of the documentary, point proven. So I do think this is an excellent feature. I do think it's worth watching, and I do think Greta Thunberg is a fascinating character. And frankly, the last point I'll make is the fact that there are people there is a section where it shows, of course, the online criticism of her and the actual attacks that are made against her, with people sending death threats to her family, which frankly is repugnant and disgusting. There is even one man who is clearly a jackass on YouTube, who refers to people who are encouraging this quote-unquote mentally ill girl to push their virtue signalling environmental lies, or something to that effect. And that man is a jackass, and the fact that his face is in the documentary and is shown as such, it pleases me, because that kind of reductive, awful thinking is horrible. And the fact that he would attack this young woman in this way is disgusting. So that really affected me. I'm aware that I too am a jackass who's on YouTube, so, you know, but my point remains the same. This is an excellent documentary and well worth watching. Anyway, so if you could, you see where I am? Just below me, you'll see the like button. If you could click that like button, you would be doing me a massive favour. If you could click the subscribe button, which is right next to it, that would also do me a favour. And if you would share this on any of your on all social media platforms, again, you would be doing me a solid. I'll see you again tomorrow. Oh, and follow me at Jordan_Woodley on Twitter. See you again tomorrow. Take care.